Hi, folks. I'm Adrian Sanabria, the host of Enterprise Security Weekly. Every week, we interview the most interesting folks we can find, talking about the most pressing cybersecurity issues and challenges facing the enterprise today. Myself and my co-hosts have each been in the industry for decades, long enough to see the patterns in the industry and explore where trends are going. In addition to enterprise challenges, we also follow the vendor space, the most interesting security startups emerging, technology and product trends, all of the most interesting funding and acquisition announcements. Finally, we love to discuss the latest trends in tech and how they'll impact cybersecurity. If you're wondering how the latest in AI, quantum computing, cloud, and DevOps is going to impact security a few years down the road, you should follow the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast. Join us at an upcoming official cybersecurity summit in a city near you. This series of one-day, invitation-only, executive-level conferences are designed to educate senior cyber professionals on the latest threat landscape. We're pleased to offer our listeners $100 off admission when you use code SECWEEK23 to register. All right, visit securityweekly.com/cybersecurity summit to learn more and register today. All right, now on to the Security Weekly news. We've got some fun ones in here. Let's see, where should we? So I figure, let's start on the more serious ones, and we'll get to some of the funny and silly ones. Thought it was interesting that FBI seized Genesis Market, which, as I understand it, I don't know a ton about this. Tyler probably knows more. Probably everybody knows more about it than me, but I understand, like, when you get the malware that steals all your cookies and your creds and stuff like that, this is where they put that stuff up for sale.
Correct.
Or used to, before it was taken down.
Yeah, it was a great operation, honestly. There were a substantial number of people. We will say the FBI got the credit, seized it, but there were a lot of players in the background that did a lot of work prior to this and helped with this operation. So Operation Cookie Monster was successful, and Genesis was one of the most.
Say it again.
Operation
Cookie Monster.
Operation Cookie Monster.
I love it.
You like that?
Love it. Operation, because of course Cookie Monster, because they're selling OAuth keys and stuff like that, right? So
yeah, it was a big marketplace, though. Honestly, like, you were talking on any given week, you're talking 60,000 plus users on there, and or a lot of credentials. So they tracked a lot of the credential theft and even some of the more prolific breaches to some of the credentials on there. So,
yeah, like,
it was a good move.
The lapses
it was not the only takedown. Honestly, the breach forums had went down. Genesis went down. Breach forums clones went down. So there was a lot of kind of takedowns happening at the same time.
Busy law enforcement and whoever's helping them out.
Yeah, there you
go. Yeah, as you alluded to, others helping.
I just wonder how much effect you think this had on the criminal marketplace. Is it like closing one fence, everybody just goes to the next one, business goes on as usual?
Yes and no. I mean, there are other marketplaces, and there are other, new stuff will stand up, as it always does, and actors will continue being actors. So this one was around long enough and has been prolific enough from a number of creds and number of bots and stealers ingesting creds into it, that it's going to make a small dent for a little while. And at the very minimum, it does take breach credentials off of the playing table for a little while. So I wouldn't say that it made a huge difference, but all of the creds that were there and a lot of the analysis has been uploaded to Have I Been Pwned, and Travis has been doing notifications, and there's ways to check those and validate them. So those credentials should be inside a blacklist for some of the Microsoft products as well as others. So it makes a difference, but it's, you're talking about a small divot again.
Right. Well, when I was researching this one earlier in the week, I noticed that they had taken down, not only taken down the sites, but they got 119 arrests. So I'm thinking for them to regroup, they've got to gets, they haven't got all their staff anymore to do that. And I think this was originally, I was wondering if it still was. Originally, this was an invite-only marketplace. So then they'd already know who their users were. If they set up again, they can get them again. But losing 119 employees.
Yeah, with grabbing the servers and all the data and logs and stuff, but it definitely provided some intel to some places. It was invite-only, and there was a lot of good stuff on there from an action standpoint. Like, a lot of people kept a close eye on it and did a lot of notifications. Some of the creds weren't super high value, but once in a while you'd have some very interesting credentials pop in there, and that was terrifying when they did. So
I didn't realize they had their own browser.
Browser?
Yeah, the Genesium browser and the Genesis security plugin.
Yep. And again, not to say that this is the only marketplace. Like, those are two plugins, two browsers. You will see many of these plugins, extensions, stealers, the amount of credentials being harvested from browsers and from different add-ons and websites being attacked every day. Like, this is one example of many other stealers and places out there. We got a hold of a breach for just one actor group for one set of stealers, and it was 12 terabytes in text logs of just stealer data, and that was zipped. Extracting that, it was 32 terabytes worth of text files. So again, one actor group, and that's the amount of data we're dealing with. So this stuff's all over the place.
So you described these as the malware that grabs the stuff as info stealers. Is that right?
Yeah, info stealers or stealers. They'll get commonly referred to as just stealers.
And stuff
they
like,
usually hook into the browser, and they'll take either password managers, save credentials in your file for the browser. You grant the extension unlimited access, it'll grab credentials as they're being put in for some of the more advanced ones. Copy and paste, it'll get a hold of the clipboard. So yeah, there's quite a few ways that they do it.
And a cool detail here is that the FBI provided "Have I been pwned" with what they found in the market. So that now people can get notified that their stuff was compromised on there.
Yep. Yeah, Travis is pushing out a bunch of that, and hopefully they share that database with other places that are doing the same things. But Travis's service is pushing a bunch of.
That's a more modern law enforcement approach to a lot of this stuff, because they've started trying to, all the states have sharing organizations and fusion centers, and they disperse this information to participants in those things like MSISEC and InfraGard, and all these kind of things get dispatches, which is really great, because there was a time when, law enforcement was like, we don't talk about this even amongst ourselves, because they were so concerned about it, because they really didn't know what they were doing. And they didn't want anybody to notice that they really didn't have a plan. And, today they've gotten beyond that. They've gotten to the point where they know it's great if I could call Tyler and say, I don't know what this is. Do you have any idea? And all that kind of both front channel and back channel kind of communication that goes on, I think really facilitates a lot of, especially medium-sized and smaller businesses who don't have threat hunters, who don't have incident responders, who really rely on this kind of thing just a lot, so that they can get this kind of information that advises them on what to do. So it's really great. Thanks, law enforcement people. I think you're really doing a much better job with this and getting that information out there to help everybody in general. Not to mention it goes the other way. So that kind of trust then turns around and lets those small and medium-sized businesses feel comfortable contacting law enforcement and saying, this is happening. Do you know what it is? And now that law enforcement can say, yeah, we've seen that before. Let us give you some advice. And so I think that's a really, really big move forward we've seen in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, I think the collaboration is getting better, honestly, between the long-standing relationships in government where you've had people at the same place or work in the same division, whether you're north or south, one of the forts. All of those people have went on, established, either built businesses and or moved on and have very high level technical roles now. That's facilitated a good medium for everyone to begin collaborating and trusting a little bit more, at least the places that matter. So you get enough, you get a couple hundred people in the same communication platform, and they are, controlling 80% of the internet, or at least, hosting services, ISPs, cloud providers, major organizations, and the security in there, then things can happen on the back channel very, very quickly. And when that info flows and you have some trust, that's when stuff actually starts to happen and make a difference.
And it's catching up too. I think that's another good piece of it, is that now, you see MSISEC releases and you see InfraGard releases and you see CISA releases and so forth. Not like it used to be where, I read about that on Krebs 2 weeks ago, and now there's finally a notification. So they're actually making that real-time information useful and not being quite so. I know they have to protect what they're doing, and you can't talk about operations that are ongoing. But once these things start getting resolved, they've got much better information flows to get that stuff out. So if you are out there and you're looking for ways into these kind of things, InfraGard and MSISEC and all these kind of things are available to you, and they don't cost anything. So get some of your people, have them join InfraGard, get on those mailing lists, and there's no good reason that you shouldn't be doing that, because you can't say it costs too much, because it really costs you almost nothing to get some of your people in InfraGard. And pretty much every state has an InfraGard chapter now. Most cities have InfraGard chapters. So get involved, meet some other people, plus you get to meet the law enforcement people, and you can help them and they can help you. So get in on it.
Yeah, it's I noticed Kev, CISA's updating their known exploited vulnerabilities catalog same day when something happens. I've noticed.
Yeah,
I get those emails. Yeah.
I mean, I get them from like 3 different directions, and so it's great. I mean, I love seeing that stuff pop up, because it's like that is stuff I want to take care of. So when something pops, it just says Cisco on it. I mean, I have Cisco equipment, and I'm like, I want to be sure I'm up on that too, because I may not, I can't sit there 24 hours a day watching a ticker or something. Right. I mean, I'd like to, but they won't let me.
So my next one, number 3, kind of curious what everybody thought about this. This is Christopher Peacock, who I think works at Scythe. That's right. But yeah, Scythe. So he's basically saying, starting to think if you can't catch ransomware actors, you can't catch any actor. And that resonated with me, because every time I read a report on how an extortion crew gets access to a target and gets ransomware put into place, I'm like, this is every pen test I've ever seen right here. This is like what we've been training for 20 years. It is like, what was all that for? Like every, not even good pen test, right? Like mediocre pen tests. If you were good at stopping those, then you should probably be able to stop most ransomware attacks, I feel like. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I would say yes and no. Like there's really 2 sides to that, right? Like, yeah, the ransomware actors are not doing anything overly sophisticated in many cases. They're still hands on keyboard in some cases. You should be able to catch those, but most networks now, we've gotten to the point where we are so spread thin and so diverse between single sign-on, SaaS applications, our inability and volume of email that has been happening, and the ever-changing TTPs of ransomware, right? Like between the loaders adjusting to get through spam filters and or get deployed on desktops, which then loads the ransomware. Like the initial access vector is, as often as it says, hey, you got phished, like there's some nuance to how they got phished, what phished them in the first place, and what loader was used to load the ransomware. So yes and no. I think the ransomware is not super sophisticated. We should be doing the fundamentals, and the fundamentals will keep you safe if you're doing them well. today's complex enterprise environment and the nuances of technical debt over multiple decades across many more platforms and technology without the budget and skill set to continually defend that. That's why we're kind of in the state that we're in. I think we are still paying that technical debt, and we're still coming forward with too many new things that are flashy, fantastic new services, SaaS applications, whatever integrations, whatever you want to call it, to keep up with business. Those business pieces and complexities have just lended itself to not being able to secure and do the fundamentals and prioritize those as an organization.
I'm kind of in agreement. I'm kind of in the yes camp of that. I do agree with yes and no, but I kind of lean yes here in that if you can't catch this, you probably won't catch more sophisticated things. And ransomware is all about low-hanging fruit for the most part. But, I think a lot of companies don't have it's easy to talk about this stuff in theory. It's easy to, we've all taken pen testing classes. Many of us have taught pen testing classes. And it's easy to say. It's a lot more difficult to actually do those things on a day-to-day basis and keep up when you've got 3 people and you're operating, without a net, and you're trying to keep all this stuff going. And, a lot of companies go out and pay money, and somebody comes in and pushes a button and says, here's your pen test. And they sign on the line and say, great, we've done our pen test. But they don't have any resources to actually correct these things or implement things that would prevent this stuff from happening. And I've managed those networks where it's like, I'm so busy trying to keep the thing running, I don't have time to sit there and look at the logs and try to manage all that stuff and try to pull it all together. There's companies that can afford teams, sure, but a lot of companies can't, and plenty of even medium-sized companies. Literally, they just don't have anybody dedicated to this. They assign it to somebody. It's like being the fire marshal. You're the person that's sitting at the table, and they put the civil defense hat on your desk and go, okay, you're the fire marshal. And, I sure hope there's not a fire, because I remember when they did it to me, I was like, I have no idea what to do when there's a radioactive fire. I put this helmet on my desk and said, this week you're the fire marshal. And I'm like, so about that radiation leak, but I had to go back to my job. And so I think what happens to people is just that it's very easy to say, I'll take care of that tomorrow. Today, we got to get the email working again. And if I can dedicate persons to this, if I can hire Tyler and have him working on it 24/7, I'm in pretty good shape, and I ought to catch every single ransomware attack. But unfortunately, I can't afford Tyler. I can't even afford me. And, it gets weird.
So my counterpoint on that, and kind of where I was coming from, was, I did a lot of pen testing, and, never once did it seem to occur to somebody that an outside pen test, you're talking about hiring like a pen test resource internally, but like when you're having that external pen test, I always saw that as a great opportunity to test your IR skills, and never saw a company see it that way or take advantage of it for that. And this is long before purple teaming was a thing, and before that turned into a discrete specific service. But I just feel like a lot of that pen testing money was wasted because it was seen as like an extension of the vulnerability program, like find the patches we forgot to install or the assets we missed, when it should have been, how good can I do responding to an emulated adversary?
Well, I remember carrying this report into this person, and I was doing pen tests, and we were a third-party entity that was working internally, and I carried this result. Nobody was involved at the company. We did all this, and we would take it to them. And I took it to this person, and he looked at it, and I said, so here's 3. I'd written here's 5 things you could do right now to fix some serious problems. And he said, do we have to do them to get signed off? And I said, well, we don't really do that. We're trying to advise you. And he said, so you're saying we don't have to do them? And I was like, yeah, but they would take like 5 minutes. You could just reset these 3 things. It would improve the situation. And he was like, but do we have to do them to get signed off? And I was like, you could have done them while you're arguing with me. And he was like, but do we have to do them to get signed off? And I said, no. And he said, then sign the damn thing. And I was like, there you go. Thanks for having us in. You have a great day. Oh. And I was walking all the way to the car telling my partner, I was like, I wish I was evil. Oh, do I wish I was evil, because this was going to be a joke. I'm like,
Yeah.
but I mean, they just don't want to do it. I mean, the mentality is this is extra work I don't have to do. It's not going to happen to me. I don't want to fool with it. And the more of this we do, the more work we'll have, and then it makes us look bad. And that was the other thing. I'll shut up. I promise, Adrian. I noticed they were terrified because they felt like if that went to management and management said,
right,
you had 147 check marks, what the hell? They were going to get fired, which did happen. And then they would replace them with somebody even worse, and then that person would go, "It's all fixed, sir." I'm like, "No, it's not. You just signed it. You didn't fix it." And they're like, "It's fixed, sir." I mean, so that kind of upper management attitude, it's a big mess. I mean, and I completely agree with you, Adrian.
It's a perverse incentive. Yeah. The fear of what management would say was greater, and honestly, the likelihood was much better than having a breach, right?
Yeah.
Like it was 100% a pain in their butt if they had to report that stuff up the chain versus just kind of hiding it and moving on.
I remember an upper management person asking me, he said, "So how good are our people?" And I was like, that's not the purpose of this. And he's like, "Oh, I thought we were trying to find out if our people were competent or incompetent." And I was like, "No, we're trying to give you, places you need to fix. It doesn't mean the fire department sucks because you have a big bin full of oily rags that caught on fire. It means you shouldn't have a bin full of oily rags." But, and I had a shirt that said, "I'm not the enemy," but it didn't matter.
Nope.
And we used to joke we needed a breach as a service or something like that IT teams could subscribe to, because some of those companies, the reality was that until they got hit and somebody made it real for them, they would just go on with that attitude. And
I mean, it's just called being a reactive company in the management literature, and I mean, they did that with everything. They don't worry about sales, they don't worry about marketing, they don't worry about anything until they have to. And then when something happens, they try to respond to it. And that's like the worst approach to just about everything. And with this, it's the absolute worst approach, but it's tough. It's a tough sell. Even if you can go in there and say, "I could fix 100 things and you'll be better off tomorrow." And they're just like, "Yeah, but or worse, they say, if we write this stuff down, it's just like a recipe book for how to hurt us."
Yeah. All right.
I think what you
some recipes. Yeah.
I think what you just described explains what's going on with my Article 1, where they said 70% of people surveyed have been told by their management not to report security incidents.
Oh, yeah.
But just cover them.
Yes. Yeah, we've got that queued up for Enterprise Security Weekly tomorrow. But yeah, please, Sam, dive into that a little bit more. Yeah,
well, it's a Bitdefender survey, and their headline, because they're in the UK, I think, is that 40% of people have been told not to report incidents, but in America, it's 70%, higher than any other country. And wow. I think it's just what he described. Management does not want to be embarrassed, and they're probably breaking the law by not doing this, but my impression is that they don't imagine they're going to get caught. They don't imagine they're going to get punished for failing to report a breach, which I suppose is probably true.
And they don't want the shareholders to hear from a pen test. I mean, they're terrified that we had to sign so many NDAs, and we were supposed to shred all our notes, and we weren't supposed to, and all this stuff, because they did not want a document to leak outside the company that said maybe somebody wasn't doing what they should be, because the shareholders are going to revolt and maybe sell their shares. And it was just like a giant death spiral of crazy to me. But it was the absolute. I mean, if I change and I put on a manager's hat, I can see it. I mean, I've worked for those companies where if I went to my boss and said, "We got all these holes, we got to fix them," they'd be like, "Okay, thanks for working here. Please pick up your package on the way to the door."
Yeah. So try it in the public sector where your audit reports are published to the Federal Register. It's a different experience. But my take on this article was actually slightly different because what I see is a lot of folks are getting ransomware and they're shutting down the attack. Then they spend months trying to go back and find out who it is, and they don't necessarily figure it out. And I'm pretty sure even if they say it was Lockbit, they don't go out and get anybody arrested. So I don't understand what they mean by catch exactly, because you're not catching the wily guy going after you. You might find the organization, you can stop the spread of the infection and remediate. But I don't think the ransomware folks themselves are getting caught. They're still in business.
No. How do you catch them?
I think nobody's catching them.
What do you do? You call the Warwick Police Department and say some guy in Nigeria is in my network. There's not a lot they can do about that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I just read it that they were
catch.
Is what?
I mean, what do they mean by catch? You're kicking down the door, finding them in front of their computers with their bag of chips and their shorts, or what?
I guess I read it catch them in the sense that they're in your network before they could drop their ransomware bombs. That I'm going to detect that they're there. It was how I was reading catch. Not that I was going to actually go get them.
Yeah, because that's. And like I said, I notice a lot of they catch them before they get too far these days. But in terms of they catch the attack, but I don't the remediate, figure out where it root caused, all that seems to take forever.
Yeah,
and I think part of it is they're not, the data ain't there.
And I don't know how productive that is.
There was some crazy report. I don't know if you guys talked about this last week, but I thought I had it queued up somewhere, but I remember chatting about it on Twitter, where I think it was a Ponemon report, and it was talking about like the average time to detect was 253 days or something like that on a ransomware attack. And then they were like, in a destructive attack, the time to detect was quicker, but 218 days. And like, none of that made any sense to me. Like, I mean, how destructive an attack can it be if it takes you 218 days on average to notice it? And like the ransomware ones, like the moment they've got everything in place and they've stolen your data and maybe they encrypt some of your files or whatever they do these days, like you're getting the ransom note.
But I think the attackers are trying to stay in the network and persist as long as possible. And more and more to me, the ransomware is just you toss a match over your shoulder when you're walking out the door so that it's harder for them to recover.
Yep.
But the real gain there was getting data and getting usernames and passwords and all this kind of stuff, because half the time when they set the company back up and they recreate all the accounts, so people go right back in and put the same passwords in again, and we just start over.
Wait,
So
you mean like
yellow
nation states using ransomware as smoke and mirrors?
Makes sense to me. That's what I would do.
I mean,
you're evil, Tyler.
My takeaway was I got the sense that it was like maybe a data science person without a background in security putting together the report and just didn't understand the data they were looking at, because none of the numbers made any sense to me.
Yeah.
And that happens more often than you would think.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to reporting, and as easy as it sounds, every situation tends to be a little different based on who your general counsel is, what your legal ramifications are. Do you have shareholders? Do you have a board that you have to report to? Does the board have a final say? Are they cyber aware? Do you have legal ramifications for PCI? All of those things kind of come down to why and when you report it, and those are always not cut dry and clear. There's a lot of side projects and intellectual property, things you don't want leaked that could ruin a company. So, those decisions, well, we sideline quarterback some of this. There's a substantial amount that goes into a breach. And so we kind of have to realize that each one of these breaches is in and of itself its own situation. So expecting them not to pay or expecting them to report it very quickly, like, give or take, maybe mom and pop shops should and could just so they get help. But at the end of the day, that's not something that everybody decides. So I don't fault anybody after having helped many companies with this, because it's very tedious.
And remember that number, that time to detect, includes all the time it took them to agree to report.
It shouldn't, though. That's not
shouldn't.
detect.
I agree it shouldn't, but it does, because there's no way they're going to release anything until it's gone through corporate legal. And so the minute I send a document to corporate legal to get them to approve something, a lot of times I've had them say it'll be six months before we get a chance to read this. And I'm like, we need to do something about this afternoon. And they say, we'll get back to you. And,
And hopefully regulation helps with that.
I think it's the one place regulation helps a little bit. I mean, I know that not everybody agrees with me on that, but I do think that requiring companies to report, various things in a timely manner, if there's any kind of real penalty, and of course every company is going to compute the penalty versus the cost. And if the penalty is just, we got to pay $10,000 if we don't report this, they're just going to say, yeah, we'd rather wait and pay the $10,000. I mean, it's just like, paying the parking meter for a lot of companies. And I saw that on everything we were reporting back, where they're always running a spreadsheet on if we announce this and the share price drops $3 versus we get penalized $10 million. Well, the share price dropping $3 is going to be a lot more than the $10 million I've got to pay in a fine. And so we'll just take the chance we have to pay the fine. And I know how to compute that stuff. It's like, what's the likelihood you'll have to pay the fine? What's the likelihood you'll lose a court? And, you start multiplying that by, well, there's a 30% chance, and 30% of 10 million is 3 million. The share price dropped $3. Oh my God, it's $100 million bucks. So no, we're not doing that. And we'll just take the hit. However, lawyers call the SEC and we'll see what they say. And I mean, that's just a game they play.
Yeah. Well, the other game, Doug, is the don't announce the incident until you put it in that SEC filing that you have to do.
Well, there you go. Yeah. I mean, just wait till you're 10K or 7K or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. That I forget the name of the thing too, but
and that's a gray area. It's like when they say report, that would be in our SEC filing. I mean, I can just right in my head right now, I'm like imagining that meeting where the corporate lawyers are going, yeah, that means that the report, so we report this in the next required report, correct? The law doesn't say exactly when it has to be reported, so I think we can put that out after the income or the earnings release on a 7K. Yeah, I can imagine that meeting going on right now at this table. And
yeah, well, I mean, Joe Sullivan and the Drizzly CEO, like we're seeing more and more examples of cases where there are definitely even personal ramifications for not just for breaches in the Drizzly case or in the Joe Sullivan case, trying to avoid reporting something.
And I'm talking about upstanding companies too. I'm not even talking about companies like FTX or somebody where they're like, we have computers.
The stats speak for themselves. The stats in this article speak for themselves. Yeah. I mean, those are huge percentages.
Yeah.
40% and 70%.
I mean, it's just an attitude, and it's not an attitude that's going to change anytime soon, I don't think. I mean, they were the same way about all sorts of risk.
Let's move on to something less depressing. Doug, tell me why my headlights are going to sell me out.
Well, this was what they found out in that story was that in a lot of cars now apparently have what I guess I would call smart headlamps. And they adjust to all sorts of different things. They have automatic, brights and dims. They have, my car, when you turn the wheel, the headlamps adjust to that, and there's all this stuff. So apparently, all these types of headlamps now are plugged into that e-com system, which is the backbone or the the e-bus system in the car, which is connected to everything. And so back into that old school 1970s, 1980s problem of make it work. So the oldest idea of engineering is make it work and, make it safe, but make it work. But they never think about that kind of security. So because the headlights are connected to the ankle bone, which is connected to the shin bone, which is connected to Larry's backbone and all that stuff, it can get into everything. And there's not like a lot of network segmentation going on in there. So if you compromise one subsystem, you can actually get to all the other subsystems. And so now here's the upside. The upside was it wasn't something that people were able to do driving down the highway. It was something where they actually had to have access to your vehicle. And now, of course, if you're like a lot of people and you park your car on West 110th Street at night, oh boy, did I ever wish I could park my car on West 110th Street. I park my car on West 132nd Street and walk back to 110th Street, and I leave it sitting there, all night long. And I assure you, if I was walking down West 132nd Street at 2 o'clock in the morning and 3 guys were sitting on lounge chairs taking a car apart, I would not have stopped and went, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" And so, they were issuing cautions saying if you notice like scratches and things around, like the headlamp assembly on your car. Now, I went out and looked at mine. I think it would take some doing to get that assembly deconstructed, Now, again, I'm not naive. I know that professional thieves can go, in 5 seconds and they know exactly how to do it and they know exactly what they're looking for. But I think in general, I don't think it was the level of threat warranted by the headline. But at the same time, it definitely was a scary kind of thought because as more and more of the subsystems in your car become enabled and become connected to that bus, more and more threats are going to emerge along those same lines.
Well, this didn't come out of a threat lab. This is a report on car thieves actually doing this.
No, I mean, they can do it. And like I say,
so,
professional thieves can just take the car. I mean, and my policy on that's always been, if people want your car, they're probably going to get it. I mean, that's always been the way it was. And, one of my policies was always drive a car nobody wants. For years, I drove a 1968 Chevelle that had no paint on it. Nobody ever bothered it. I mean, ever. And you could have just hot wired that thing. It had no subsystems. You could just get up under it was a bunny. In fact, for a while, I didn't have a key for it. And it was just hot wired into a straight up toggle switch that my dad put in there. But I mean, at the end of the day, professional thieves are probably always going to find ways around these systems because they make a living doing it. And so just like professional anything, they've got the tools, they've got the schematic, they've got everything they need to get away with it. But I do think we need more security on our cars. I mean, obviously, if you have a car you value, maybe don't leave it sitting on 132nd Street at night. Yeah, good luck with that.
There's other ways you could do this, too, that would be a lot easier. I mean, I remember, I think it was in Budapest, we were sitting there, and when there was an issue with a car that had to be towed, they didn't pick it up from the front or the back. They brought a flatbed. They basically picked the whole car up, put it on the flatbed, and drove it away. It took like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And nobody would question somebody doing that because it's a freaking pickup truck with the right logo on it. I mean,
that's how they were stealing Harleys in Providence. They had a truck. They pulled up beside a Harley that was sitting on the street, and they just had this like forklift thing that reached out, lifted the motorcycle up, and put it in the back of the truck, and the lid slammed down. And they moved right on. So they showed me it was taking them like less than 2 minutes to do.
Right. Wow. Then you take it wherever you spend your time doing whatever to break into it. You don't even have to be destructive at that point. You've got all the time in the world.
They just take it back to the warehouse somewhere and disassemble the whole thing, and then who cares? You don't even need this. But apparently using these systems, you can cause the car to start, and of course the more fly-by-wire cars get, the easier that will become. But at the same time, old cars didn't have any of those systems, and they were really, really easy to steal. So now you at least have to have a little bit of training before you can steal them.
Some skill.
I mean, these injector kits, so this is the scary part about this and how CAN is being designed, is the car manufacturers, especially for this particular attack, where you're essentially doing an overload on the CAN bus through the headlights, where you're getting to an ECU that has a gateway. The gateway is listening for messages. You basically are glitching that gateway and sending an injector across that CAN bus that tells it to unlock the door, and then you can steal the car. Now, this is all done through something you can buy on eBay. This is a JBL speaker that's modified with a well-known, pretty low-cost chip for CAN bus hacking. But it works on like Honda, Jaguar, Lexus, Volkswagen, there was Cadillac, GMC. Most of the major car vendors, like, this works pretty straightforward. And this is literally leveraging a JBL speaker with an added chip inside of it. And the thieves have basically no technical knowledge in order to do this. You're pressing the play button, and it's running through and doing CAN injection for you. So kind of terrifying, and at the same time, we know cars are going to get stolen, and there's always going to be thieves. That cat and mouse game plays out for physical thieves as well as virtual thieves. So don't keep important shit in there, and know that your car could get stolen. I don't know how else you would protect against something like a CAN bus attack, because the CAN bus is now integrated into all the systems with multiple ECUs and multiple gateways. So
How else
This
are you going
just
to
in,
operate your
Amazon
car
banned
from a phone
sale
app?
of
right?
JBL speakers. Want to see Amazon
Yeah,
ban the sale of JBL speakers, right?
Yeah, this is why you can't buy any anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think there's
crazy.
little you can do. I mean, obviously manufacturers can do more to do this, and the article was talking about the manufacturers need to push out updates to try to protect this stuff better. But again, they're going to do that little calculation we were talking about earlier, and seeing if the cost of fixing it is more than the cost of just letting it go. And there's always the Ford Pinto if you want to talk about business cases and absolute how that really works. Because if you aren't familiar with that case, the Ford Pinto was an infamous vehicle which often burst into flames when struck from behind. And the Ford Motor Company basically did a calculation to determine the cost of paying the lawsuits to the people who were horribly, mutilated and killed versus how much it would cost to recall all the cars and fix the problem. And they decided it was cheaper just to pay everybody off. So sucks if you're the person who gets, I had a friend who got burst into flames like that. And, if they decide it's to their monetary advantage to fix it, they will. But otherwise, they'll just keep stealing your car. So I highly recommend the 68 Chevelle. You do have to know how to drive a stick shift, but nobody's ever going to steal that puppy.
Yeah, because the car has to have value before it can be
exactly. And if they do steal it, get $100 and go buy another one. You're good to go.
Yeah. Sam, if you're back, can we be interesting to grab one of these? You've got a couple AI stories here. Grab your favorite AI story here, and let's go after that.
All right. Well, one of them that I thought was pretty fun as an extension of what we talked about last week. Last week, we talked about Elon Musk, who signed this document saying they should stop development of AI for 6 months so the ethical concerns can be addressed. And there was some person who perhaps shall remain anonymous on this podcast that was so cynical that said he's just doing that to delay while he builds his own. And that appears to be true.
That was me.
Yes.
I'm proud of my cynical badge, but it's often correct.
Yes, and so he's buying GPUs to make generative AI at Twitter. So it does appear that it was a stunt while he develops his own.
Yeah. Watch the show Silicon Valley. You'll understand the whole thing.
He'd never pull something like that.
No way. He's only interested in humanity and good things.
That would be sleazy, like changing the logo to Doge just to make Dogecoin go up or something like that.
Yeah, well, and to be okay. So to be, I hate to be the other side of this argument, but to be entirely fair, the 6-month pause was specifically about anything more advanced than GPT-4, anything that kind of delves into this area where we currently don't understand what GPT-4 is doing and how it's thinking and why exactly it's doing different things. So it was specific. It wasn't a pause of all AI work.
Yeah,
it was only like the super advanced stuff.
Yeah, because he was working on Skynet and he needed another 4 months to get it out there.
Yeah, but who would make a program and then say, I bought all this hardware and I'm going to get a bunch of engineers working on it, but we promise not to develop anything new, but to stop where people have already gotten to.
God.
Well, it can be new.
Yeah. Tell me
it can be new. It just, all right. I don't like being on the side of the argument.
I, for one, welcome our new AI overlords.
So, well, Adrian, was that word you used spelled with a G, GNU?
Anyway, if you look at my article number 5, there's an irrelevant thing here where someone's trying to talk about the mounting human and environmental cost of generative AI. But the thing I thought was interesting was the first figure shows how fast AI is growing. And they have the number of parameters, which is probably the best simple measure of the power of it. And it is not growing at Moore's law. It is growing much faster than Moore's law. Every year, it gets 10 times better. So that, by the way, would sort of justify that argument that you should have a pause. It's getting better so fast that this is sort of like Ray Kurzweil's singularity, where he said, when AI starts improving itself and you don't need a human in the loop, it will improve at a superhuman rate, and it will achieve something that you're totally out of control of.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's coming.
Well,
I mean,
that's
pretty soon. There's going to be code. There's going to be code written that we will not understand. That will be writing code that even the code doesn't understand, and it's going to get weird.
No, I think they're already there, and this is why I started emergency in my class, and I started writing some AI projects so my students can start programming AI, because then you see how it works. And the point is, even if you wanted to have something simple like Asimov's 3 rules of robotics, where I will not kill any people and things like that, there is no way to put that in an AI model.
Nope.
There's no way to put in that kind of old programming where as a rule you must obey. It just learns
that's not AI,
like a human to do something, and then experiences change, it learns something else. You're not in control of what it does, and you can't explain why it does what it does.
Well, that's the so you can kind of, and that's OpenAI has a group that does nothing but kind of take these edge cases and push them to see how far they go, to see what the model is going to do when they give it the opportunity to do something that you don't want it to do. And the terminology is alignment. So the problem of alignment is how do we, and all these models have the ability to do what they call fine tuning, which in a lot of cases is just text, is basically like anytime this entire model is going to answer a question, here's the rules, here's the things it has to take into account, what it's allowed to do, what it's not allowed to do, and then just any kind of general stuff you need to get the answers you're looking for, or to get it more in the area that you want it. So if you're using OpenAI's API, you can actually feed it your own fine-tuning data. It's not changing the model that GPT-4 or GPT 3.5 or whichever model that you're using is it's not changing that training model. It's basically just throwing rules in there saying, either here's some extra data that I want you to be able to answer questions about, or, here's some extra information on how I want you to or to not answer questions.
But even in that context, there's, to me, 2 problems. One, the fine-tuning data gets pushed in, and all of that stuff turns into this kind of swirling mass of weights and things, and it keeps getting more and more complicated as it sort of feeds on itself. And so as a simple example, long time ago, my friend Lou was writing neural net code for a bank, and he was demonstrating how his neural net code was better at predicting mortgage defaults than all of their current approaches. And because he could not explain in clear, simple terms how the hidden layers were weighted, they did not buy into it. So they rejected it. And I think it gets so complicated that, there's probably some people who can understand it, but it's going to get tricky, and it's a tough sell. So you can tweak it, but it's still doing things based on its own weighting systems that get reinforced and de-reinforced, or whatever you call that, de-weighted. And it's a scary thing. I mean, I'm a huge fan, but I'm very scared of it at the same time, because I don't know if we'll be able to keep our hands around it. And maybe, there's a Stephen Hawking person sitting out there somewhere who goes, I can fathom this, but I think the general public's not going to understand it very well. And I'm going to inject one more thing in that. I had a story as well that I put in here just because of Sam's stories, which was number 2, which is Beijing lists the stuff it wants generative AI to censor. Right. And so I think that's wishful thinking. I think that they're going to, like you said, they're going to try to fine tune it so that when somebody says what happened in Tiananmen Square, they want the AI to go, I don't think there is such a place. Only beautiful things happen in Tiananmen Square. And what Beijing was doing was they want all AI used in China to only support the principles of socialism that they advocate. And so I have no doubt that everybody else will be wanting their AI, including Elon Musk, will want his AI. If somebody says, is Elon a horrible, evil villain or a great person, the AI is always going to say, he's a great person. But I'm not sure you can constrain that. I mean, because it's not rules. It turns into weights.
This this is with their own models, and as they found out with the internet, with any complex modeled system, there's going to be ways around it, and we've seen so many of these with the rules that they've tried to put into place on ChatGPT and some of the image generating AIs. What is it, Dan or Dave, or I forget what they call. There's just all these ways to like create a hypothetical situation to basically talk it into giving you a response that it's not supposed to, like telling you how to make a bomb or something.
And how do you get serial killers?
It's social engineering.
And
you get serial killers by putting people in impossible situations where they have awful conflicting points of view and abusing the hell out of them. And I'm like, you want Skynet? That's Skynet. So
well. I object to that analogy, though, because the AI doesn't have any personality or consciousness. That's the thing. It's just predicting mathematically what the next word is in a sequence without understanding what any of the words are.
True.
So,
it understands. It absolutely understands. Like you can ask it, write me a love letter. It understands what love is.
No, I greatly protest. It does not understand what love is. It doesn't know what a letter is. All it does is it has read 10,000 love letters online, so it matches the pattern and extrapolates from that. It has no clue what it's doing. In fact,
that's what we're doing, right?
That's what humans do.
That's how we learned what a love letter was.
That's what Skinner thought. Skinner thought that humans just operated instinctively from inputs, and I think he did not succeed with this. There are many good experiments, the best one I know being the religious chickens, to prove that that's false. Humans actually have a concept of the world, and they understand that there are consequences to their action, and the GPT-4 does not.
My definition of understanding here is I don't have to explain it. It doesn't require me to explain what that means. I can tell it in very simple terms. Like if it gives me an output and I say, this isn't good enough, redo it. It understands this is not good enough, redo it, and it will redo it differently. It will not give me the same output. That's what I'm calling understanding is that if I don't have to explain it, to me, for my purposes, it understands it.
Yes, and this, I think, is the ultimate, most important fact about AI. It appears to be an intelligent human. You appear to be having a conversation with it. It appears to be giving you a human response. It's all fake. It has no actual humanity. It doesn't understand that there are consequences, that there even is a real world. And this is where they have the AIs where when is this movie coming out? They say, oh, it's coming out in 2022. That's next year. And they say, wait a minute, it's 2023 right now. And they say, oh, no, it's not. It's 2021 right now. Your clock is wrong. You need to adjust it. Here's how to adjust it. And then they say, no, you're wrong. It's 2023. And then it started being abusive and angry. And all it's doing is repeating what it found in its training set. When somebody says you're wrong, you insult them and yell back. But it doesn't actually have any feelings or have any self-image.
So like a sociopath.
It's giving you what
it doesn't need to.
And that stimulus.
Yeah, and the what do they call it when it makes up facts? The what's the term they use for it? Hallucinating. Yeah, the hallucinating is a thing. GPT-4 is way better than GPT 3.5, but yeah, I mean, calling it fake, I think is doing it a disservice though, because when it can be really good at giving you the exact output that you want, and I think that's just part of the skill that people are now going to have in using these tools is understanding what it can be, what it can give you good output on and what it's going to give you bad output on. Like if you're asking for anything factual, that's a ways off. And actually it seems like they've already got the solution for that, which is to connect it to the internet, which ChatGPT plugins does. And now it can actively look up things online. And while that doesn't make its facts perfect, it's now pulling facts from actual sources, and it will cite its sources. It will say, well, here's the date according to this Wikipedia article.
No, I think it's amazing, and it's going to help us in a million ways, but it's also going to fool people into thinking they're interacting with something like a human when it is nothing like a human.
Yeah, no, and that's I urge people to use this stuff as much as possible to understand it, because I think we're probably a year, maybe even less than a year out from understanding how to use one of these things being a requirement for a job.
You're going to
Where
be automatic code generators and things that will find the flaws in your code and things that will rewrite business letters and everything. We're going to be using this very soon.
The analogy I use is I want to go work at a guitar factory, right? But I like making things with my hands. So I want to take this, this wood body, this ash body, and I want to route out the holes for the pickups and the electronics and stuff like that by hand. Who's going to hire me when I insist on doing something that's going to take me 2 or 3 hours to do by hand with hand tools versus tossing it into a CNC machine and letting the CNC machine route out those cavities for me? Like it's not even an option. So once this stuff gets to the point where it can increase productivity, like there's just going to be people who know how to use this to their advantage to be more productive, and people who don't. It's going to be like, can I have a job? Oh, by the way, I don't understand how to use email, right? Like it's not an option. So I see that happening very quickly for certain jobs.
No, I think you're exactly right. And that's why I think everybody needs to start programming this and learning AI immediately, because if you don't understand how AI works in a year or two, it's going to be like somebody not knowing how the internet works in 2010.
Yeah. Yep. And it's happening so fast. It's so fast, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Slow down the planet. I want to get off.
Microsoft is throwing it into the Office products. It's built into
well, that'll slow it down.
half a dozen search engines at this point.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Well, I'm still flashing back on quotes from Hal in Space Odyssey.
Oh yeah.
You want to be careful what plugins you connect it into.
The lesson of Hal is still germane, because
don't give it the Pod Bay Door plugin.
The lesson from Hal was that the AI is only as good as its training set, and so you turn an AI loose on the internet, and it's going to turn racist, because there's tons of racists on the internet, whether they're real racists or just trolls. And because it has no humanity, it can't discern, that kind of thing, and that's going to teach it just what it knows. It's just like a human, though. I'm still going to say, Sam, a lot of the way we learn things, Skinner is a really good example, and the whole environment versus genetics versus all these different components, and it may get so complicated that it does start to behave more like humans.
Well, it's already a very good indication. It could probably already pass the Turing test. But as my friend Caitlin keeps pointing out, it doesn't have a body. It doesn't have real experiences. So it is not aware that any of these words have real consequences.
So it's a sociopath.
Yeah, I think it's like Ender in the novel Ender's Game. This kid is playing a video game without understanding that he's controlling soldiers in real war and real people are dying. He doesn't know that. He's just playing a game. Well, that's what
It's even a little bit worse than that, I think. And so like it doesn't understand the difference between a good answer and a bad answer. It just knows that it's an answer. So like the way I try and think about this is like when they trained this model on, like, say, Stack Overflow was included in there. Like, did they specifically tell it that the responses with the green arrows on them are better than the ones without the green check marks, right? Or not green arrows, sorry, check marks.
No, that would have helped.
Or is it equally training on good responses and bad responses to things? And the way I tested this is I've been giving a talk called Myths and Lies in InfoSec, and it kind of focuses on some myths and fake statistics that have been made up and kind of caught on. Like some people use them for marketing. There's a couple of PR firms out there who actually make a living just making up fake stacks. Like you've probably seen the $10 trillion in damages in 2023 or something like that from cybercrime, like these enormous numbers that are like some major percentage of global GDP. And And so I asked ChatGPT questions that I knew could elicit a response like that, like just asking it, what are the damages from cybercrime, and it happily serves up these myths, these bad stats.
Yeah. There was a good article I read where they showed different levels of model. And if you have a weak model and you ask it what happens when you break a mirror, it says you can't see your reflection anymore. But if you spend a lot more money and train the model a lot better, now it tells you you'll have 7 years bad luck because it can more accurately find the false answer.
Well, and how many humans can't discern between good and bad data either? I mean, there's people that think the Earth is flat. I'm like,
fair enough.
I'm sorry.
Fair enough.
There's humans that are just as easily, unable to discern anything. And even when the facts are presented to them, when it's math, I'm not talking about ideological stuff. I'm talking about math. I can show you the math. Oh, the math is faked. No, you can't fake that. It's math. Come on. But,
I thought you said meth at first.
Meth? Well, that too. Maybe that's what's missing in the AI world. We need some, it needs a little enhancement. Give it a couple of bong hits and we'll see what it comes up with.
Oh, yeah.
Might really enlighten.
So, yeah, if you have to drop Sam, I think that was a great one for you to sign out on. That was very spirited and I think very valuable. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Sam.
And then there were three.
Actually,
yeah. I have
while
that.
we're down in Sam's articles, it's number 12. I saw this somewhere else too. Why is juice jacking back in the news? I mean, that's like an old attack.
Oh my God. It is. So yeah, I got into this on Twitter the other day, but there is not a single shred of evidence that juice jacking has ever occurred. So this is one of those myths that I talk about in my talk. And Bob Lord has gone into depth. Every time he's ever seen a story on it, he gets in touch with whoever wrote the story, whether it's the FBI or a journalist, and he chases down sources. Law enforcement, in a lot of cases, local law enforcement, you'll see this pop up. And so Bob Lord has chased those down, and he's got a blog post about it, and has never found a single case of this actually happening. And like back when it first popped up, like a decade ago or something like that, like maybe you could, without any user interaction, like do something nasty on a smartphone. But these days, I think that's highly unlikely.
Makes sense. But I mean, humans are love urban legends, and humans are notoriously susceptible to wanting to believe very over the top kind of things. And I mean, there's been urban legends like this kind of stuff ever, probably since the first people had self-awareness and started, thinking there was a chupacabra or whatever. So, and no matter how much the evidence indicates they're wrong, I mean, there's still people that believe in the Loch Ness Monster, even though, they took sonar and scanned the entire loch all the way to the bottom everywhere and said, nope, nothing there. But there's still people who will fight you if you bring that up. So I think it's really hard to stamp these stories out because they have that kind of, glitz to them that people like to read about. It's why people used to buy the National Enquirer.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, people want to believe some of this stuff. I remember seeing a survey of, don't hate me if I get this wrong, I think it was Ireland, where it was like half of people believed in fairies there. I mean, it's a social cultural thing. So it's, but yeah, I think it's worth pointing out, this was FBI Denver. This was not like the federal FBI office that said this. So I don't know.
Well, they read a story.
Grain of salt.
They read a story and, they say, is this true? And then, they don't have resources to investigate. So it's just, yeah. Why not put out a warning? Could be a thing. I mean, skimmers are a thing. So I know that that's not what this is, but I mean, skimmers work pretty well. And so it's a very similar, there's a shred of truth to it. Yeah. There's just sort of that shred.
I agree that there was an old threat. And actually what I was trying to find is years ago, in one of Josh Wright's, I think it was in his 575 class, he actually had an image from a DEF CON where they actually had a USB charger that would do juice jacking, and it was on somebody's table. And given the context, I mean, it was intended to get people on the wall of shame. but I don't have the result. I was trying to find that to get context. But I don't think as a general widespread attack, it's a thing. I think examples like DEFCON are legit, but elsewhere, I don't know.
No, yeah. So public Wi-Fi is another one I would put on that list. That's a myth. That it's super dangerous to use public Wi-Fi. So for almost 10 years, I tested this theory every time I connected to public Wi-Fi, and I did a lot of traveling in that time. So on the plane, in the airport, in coffee shops, Airbnb houses. Airbnb houses might be the exception, but in almost every case, client isolation is enabled. Which is exactly what you want to do with any kind of public-facing Wi-Fi, which basically says any two people or two systems connected to that Wi-Fi can't talk to each other. You can only talk to the gateway. So there's no way to man in the middle. And that cuts out like 99% of the different attacks that you could do.
Do you think some of this stuff came from the days when everything was sent in the clear? I mean, there was the old cell scope days. When your cell phone.
Yeah, that was true at one point.
Yeah, I mean, when your cell phone was wide open,
I could hit everybody in the coffee shop.
Yeah. But I think that I think most modern systems have pretty much wiped that stuff out.
Well, so the only really threat that remains is if you have a public Wi-Fi which has not got security turned on, which is unusual. Because most coffee shops, the Wi-Fi password is whatever the place's name is. But whatever, if you had one, when your device was broadcasting, it'd be simple enough to do a karma attack and impersonate one of those networks.
Yeah.
And your device would join it because it didn't.
Yeah.
It met the security was equal.
Yeah. Evil AP. The evil AP attack is still
worked,
valid, I think.
But what's that? A 1% type? It's a real small percentage.
Somebody has to physically be there to pull it off.
Yeah, you have to set it up and make a hotspot.
You need your
Wi-Fi
Wi-Fi pineapple.
Well, you don't even have to do that. You can make your phone a hotspot and give it a name. So if you name your phone McDonald's 2 or something, and you sit there in the restaurant and people are connecting to it, you would have access to the traffic. But I don't know that that's that viable over a large scale.
Well, I'm wondering if it's. I actually did that. I was doing an experiment for a talk I was giving to high schoolers. I'd set up an AP. It was the AT&T wireless, just like was in Starbucks at that time, and it would send you to a site that would rickroll you. And I had it all up and running. And before the event, employees were coming to me asking what was wrong with their phones. Why were they getting this video?
The one I did was it was students, and we were just trying to demonstrate this, but we set up an AP, and what I was trying to get from them was their username and password. So I had it pop up a screen that said, please log in to use the free Wi-Fi, and they would put their username and password in, and then I asked, I said, don't raise your hands, but how many people in here just use the same username and the same password that you use on a lot of other services? And think to yourself, did I just give up everything to Doug, and now he's got my username and password because you might want to go change it?
Right. Well, actually, I based mine on Josh Wright's "I Hate My Neighbors," and it had a lot of different hacks, but I did that one because I wouldn't get in trouble from cybersecurity and or any other or HR. But password capture would have been bad.
The other consideration, Doug, to your point, is like 10, 12 years ago, like it happened really fast, but a lot of the internet wasn't encrypted.
Yes.
A lot of your sessions, I should say, with websites, HTTPS was not the default.
No.
And then over like a 4-year period, we just had this huge push to make it happen.
Yep.
And maybe it was, maybe I'm remembering it being shorter than it was, but it seemed like it happened very fast. Especially when Google started downgrading your SEO. If you weren't using HTTPS, like that was a big incentive.
I think it just it happened pretty quickly because it was doable. There was a time when that HTTPS was perceived as being resource intensive and slow and bandwidth hogging. And as that became no longer true, people said, well, why not? Why are we still using HTTP when we could just use HTTPS for everything? So today you don't see that many sites that aren't using it.
And the latest versions of TLS are way more efficient than they used to be. They cut out a bunch of the steps. And now the thing slowing down the internet are all these Cloudflare, like, click to confirm you're a human things. Like, I'm seeing them everywhere now.
Yeah.
Like, every single time I do, I'm using a search engine called you.com. And every time I do a search on it, it makes me go through that Cloudflare screen. And there's a few other sites I use where every single time I use the site, I have to put in a caption. It's driving me nuts.
And nothing will undo security faster than inconvenience.
So the I think the pendulum started swinging on the non-encrypted along about October of 2017 when DHS put out their binding operational directive to do HSTS, as well as SMTP over TLS as well.
Yeah.
That was the push. I mean, and that wasn't really that long ago. What, 6 years?
Yep. And
so it's interesting how things change. I love the fact that everybody's doing the SSL now and not, or TLS if you prefer, and not just setting up open web servers anymore. And it's not, and the SSL offload. Remember when you had the coprocessor because the load on your system was big when you were doing it?
Yeah.
Still works, but it's not killing your system if you're doing it locally anymore. Which is kinda cool.
Now it's Chrome. Yeah.
Well,
or your Chrome plugin. Your Grammarly plugin.
When we moved to Chrome because it wasn't bloatware.
All right, let's move to a really sexy topic. Let's talk about potential outcomes of the US National Cybersecurity Strategy.
That's Doug's number 3, isn't it?
Yeah, I put that one in there.
Doug's number 3.
I mean, basically all this stuff came out of this. So the White House issued this strategic document that is, and like you said, I'm pretty cynical, but I do think that there's some movement by the federal government towards trying to encourage people to actually take action. It's very difficult. I mean, just like we could go back through all these stories we've had tonight and say, will companies do this, willingly, even if it's a good thing? But I think the federal government is finally kind of trying to get their head wrapped around people won't necessarily do the right thing just because they can. And infrastructure has been targeted, and infrastructure is probably one of our weakest segments because it's got so much ICS and old SCADA stuff in it that all lived by the adage, it can't be hacked because nobody knows how it works kind of model, which that security through obscurity stuff is so stupid. But I mean,
GPT does.
Well, we
bet you can ask GPT. What's the default credentials for this ancient Siemens whatever? I bet you it knows it.
Yeah, I bet it does too. And I think some of that stuff has scared them, but I also think some of it's just time. I always tell the story in my talks when I talk about that kind of stuff is I did a presentation to about I don't know, it was probably like 200 or 300 people that were all wearing civilian clothes, but underneath their civilian clothes they all had like birds and stars tattooed on their shoulders. And I was talking about trying to get to threats and terrorists and stuff, and this person who was very likely a 2-star general said, "Son, when that happens, a Hellfire missile will be coming down the chimney about 5 minutes later." And I think that generation of people who didn't use computers, didn't use the internet, thought it was all stupid and they didn't want anything to do with it, have now retired. And they're being replaced by people who grew up with this stuff. And in particular, I think right now, a lot of the people who are in those positions of authority were people who didn't grow up like I did with computers, but grew up in the era of no security, of stuff just being hacked to pieces because there was just nothing there. And I think these kind of documents start to, like we were talking about the AI, these kind of documents start to fine-tune the sort of perception of government agencies and government oversight and government regulation. And they do seem to be starting to get it. And they are learning from pain, just like flatworms do. And, when the pain of a colonial pipeline or the pain of somebody turning all the stoplights in Manhattan onto green all at the same time, that didn't actually happen, but, it was one of my hell scenarios. I mean, when that stuff starts truly impacting people's day-to-day lives, those people start calling their Congress people and their senators and so forth and saying, why is nothing being done? So the White House seems to be putting out strategic guides, which is supposed to be a kind of vision document that steers the tactical documents that come out of things like CISA and DHS and so forth. And I think that's why I think this is a good thing. I think a lot of people will read this, especially in the hacking community, go, just a bunch of schlock. They're not giving us details. They're not making them do it. But in reality,
and that's not this document's purpose.
Not at all. And I had somebody tell me that not too long ago. One of my students said, this is stupid. It doesn't have any specifics. They don't make people fix things. They're just saying, oh, wouldn't it be great? But that's how that works. That's how that government reinforcement.
It's the intent.
Lee's going to tell me I'm wrong.
You okay, Lee?
No. I give you Executive Order 14028. Ones that says we have to do zero trust. We have to do DNS over SSL or whatever. We have to do there's all these mandated security improvements, which by themselves are fine. With a 2-year timeline from a couple years ago, that the entire federal government was expected to raise the bar, whether the risk warranted it or not.
No, and I'm not saying there's not tactical actions that were already ongoing.
It was the dumbest thing ever.
Well, but it's just that sort of slowly prodding something towards the goal. And I mean, all I'm saying about this, and obviously we could all rewrite this and make it better. We could all rewrite this and criticize it till the end of time. But I would love to see it. I mean, I like seeing these kind of documents come out because even though a lot of people feel they're stupid, they do start making pressure to try to move that stuff in a different direction and get people to shift their positions.
Yeah, and first of all, it's this was clearly written by committee. There's sections of it, like there's whole sections of it where it's like China bad, Iran bad, North Korea bad.
Of course.
And then sections of it where, they've got a long list of agencies and every agency has to get called out. So yeah, I mean, don't expect this doc itself to make the changes, even though people have told me that, the day after this happened, stuff actually started moving, in some industries, specifically in OT, critical infrastructure. There was some very visible movement. And you said something else, Doug, that I wanted to touch on, which was, so first of all, I agree that there is kind of a generational changing of the guard that has occurred. Like a lot of people I personally know and have known for years were involved with this and have done their tour of duty through CISA, through their, their federal salary and gave up, they could have made twice as much money in private industry, but are actually jumping into CISA and stuff like that and trying to make things better directly. But the other thing I wanted to touch on that you mentioned was, like in the case of big tobacco and big oil, it took a lot more time and it was tougher because, individuals didn't have a large voice at this level. But somebody made the point to me, we've had a couple shows covering this White House strategy on Enterprise Security Weekly, and somebody pointed out to me that the people who stand to lose here, like a lot of them are the Fortune 500. They are the big organizations, because I made the point that, hey, wait a minute, like this, if you look at Pillar 3, it says the organizations with the ability to take the responsibility to bear the cost should be the ones to do it. And I said, well, aren't those the same ones with the ability to lobby lawmakers? With the greatest ability to lobby lawmakers. But, the point was made that they're also the ones with the most to lose in terms of liability and things like that when software breaks and gets hacked.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly see that. And I mean, they have when the CEO of Colonial Pipeline wants a meeting in the White House, they get it. So I think, unlike Joe's Car Wash, which also has a threat, it is the people who can go in there and actually make change happen. So these documents help to guide, I think, how those processes come together. They don't solve the problem. They don't mandate, but they do try to say, here's what we think should happen next. And people will jump on board because they see things happening. So it's a positive message to me. And I think it does encourage people to get involved. Like you said, people give up their, 7-figure incomes in industry and go make $65,000 a year in government service. And, they're not going to do that if they think the government's position is this is all stupid. So when they start reinforcing it, it starts slowly making pressure build to push things in another direction. And that's really the only way they can operate in a democracy.
Mm-hmm. Right. Any other items here that we missed that you guys really wanted to cover?
Not yet. Although I wanted to, before we jump to the next story,
Sure.
I was going to say, I was just trying to find the reference. The Netherlands is just mandating RPKI. That's the BGP update security as a standard. But when they did it, their systems were somewhere between 75 and 80% already doing it, meaning it was already a best practice. And that's sort of jumping on Doug's idea that you're moving the bar, and then you made it mandatory once it really was a best practice. You weren't taking it where people weren't already going. That's how you succeed.
Well, that may be just jumping on the bandwagon. I mean, if people are already doing something, that's political opportunism.
Well, you might have been able, but you can do. Well, you're trying to get private industry because they're getting both public and private sector with it. So
I didn't remember that story saying that the incident was that high. I thought it was lower than that.
Well, generally across the internet, it's like 41% or something like that abuse, but within the Netherlands, it's much higher.
Well, yeah, they've been pushing that for a while, but like in the United States, or in North. I think the story, and I might have this wrong, but I did this story on the other news show. I think that the incident in North America was really, really low, like the level of that. So again, I mean, some of it is political opportunism. It's just somebody saying, hey, this is what's happening anyway. We might as well say, yeah, we were behind it and take credit for it, but with a real cynical view. But I also think that we need to continue pressing for RPKI. I mean, unsecured routes are a horrible threat. And again, those guys were always like, oh, nobody knows how BGP works. Nobody's going to bother it. It's too obscure. And, and then they started bothering it and they went, oh, this is bad. But so.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like here, it's an authority block on the update, just like DNSSEC is an authority block on the DNS record. It says, yeah, this is really authoritative. It's genuine. I think that's one of the things that with the growth of the internet got lost is how to make sure the information was genuine. And I'm not talking about necessarily what the search engines are. I'm talking about your
this is
network,
BGP routes,
your foundational services.
Yeah, this is route poisoning stuff. So
route poisoning, destination poisoning. I'm sure there's others in the list, and I'm just too tired to think of it.
Well, you can poison just about any of that stuff where the devices are exchanging information in an automated fashion because the messages were mostly sent in the clear. So BGP advertisements were sent in the clear, so anybody could pick them up, interpret them, and then set up another BGP device that could send out its own advertisements that said different things. And, so when you use RPKI, you're basically putting certificates on those BGP devices and saying, I'm not going to accept updates from a non-certified device, and it limits that ability to poison, or it makes it a lot harder to poison routes on BGP devices, which if you are not up on your dynamic routing protocols, BGP is a border gateway protocol, dynamic routing protocol that's typically used on backbone internet routers.
Yeah.
So that's where all that, you don't see that protocol very much because it's not being advertised to you as an endpoint, but it is what's being used by 9X and AT&T and all these backbone providers to do all their internet routing. So it's a very, very big threat if somebody started targeting that. So RPKI is important. And again, the White House's document's not saying you need to use RPKI, but it's saying let's start moving in better directions. So hopefully some further documents are going to come out to try to start pressing people to use RPKI in North America.
I'm crossing my fingers.
Well, you keep them crossed. It might help.
Yeah. Makes it hard to open your beer, though.
Yeah. I'll do one if you want one. The fourth story I put up was one that is just a cautionary tale. And I've told this tale to clients before. Look, your workers, if they don't have good policy guidance, are going to do bad things. They're not necessarily evil. They're not necessarily going to do horrible stuff because they want to hurt people. They're going to do it because
this reminds me of Geek Squad.
It is, and it's like immature assholes. And I mean, not that I'm one, no way I'm immature and juvenile and whatever, but regardless, people at Tesla had access to video streams from the car cameras, despite what Tesla said, which was that they didn't, but they did. And the first case I ever did involving this was about email. And it was a case where employees were routinely, because they had access to the email server. So if you've got employees that have access to Exchange server or whatever kind of email you have, and I think the one I was dealing with was like Comet Mail or something, or Vmail or one of those really old ones, but the employees could access people's email. And they did. They got bored and they went and looked at it and they read it and they started making fun of people and they started circulating, funny stories about, this person, is like worried about their weight or whatever. And it was, it was supposed to be internal, but one day somebody screwed up. And they had a bunch of emails posted on a board where they were making fun of people in the company, and some executive walked in and saw one of the emails and said, where did this come from? And the Tesla workers were doing the same thing. They were taking videos out of people's cars. They were making memes out of them. They were making fun of the people and whatever. And, they weren't hacking them. They weren't doing anything, but there was a lot of threats from this particular attack. And if nothing else, it was just a liability. So, but they were capturing people in states of undress. They were capturing people's home addresses by looking at the camera and figuring out where they lived and all kinds of stuff. And I figure that kind of thing, it's just a matter of time till somebody does hurt somebody. So just as a cautionary tale, you might want to read this story and think about your policies and your training of your employees and make sure they understand that the stuff they can access needs to be treated with great care, or it will get ugly.
I mean, that's table stakes, considering abuse cases, when people are going to have access to customer data, that's freaking table stakes. Like it's,
Well, the one we were doing was a person was suing.
Tesla, this is surprising.
Well, a person was suing the company because an email they had sent about a weight problem was widely circulated by this one employee who was making fun of the person. And they sued the company for a large sum, and they were awarded a very large settlement in that case. So it can be, right or wrong, it can be painful if you allow employees to do this kind of ridiculous stuff. And remember, IT people and security people, you have access to everything. And that puts you in a very, very dangerous position. So make sure your people are understanding how this works, and that, humor's humor, but when you start hurting people, that's all it takes, and then it's all over. So the ethics aside, it's just a bad idea.
So that lawsuit is how we know about this. Is that correct?
Is what?
That lawsuit is how we know about these practices?
Well, I don't know. What did it say? It was, I don't know how. Yeah, there was a lawsuit, and I guess the suit said there was an image being circulated of a naked man walking toward a Tesla, and they also had a collection of road rage incidents that were captured on the cameras of the vehicles that they were circulating as sort of a joke, and they were making memes out of them, and they had sort of a contest for who could make up the funniest story about this. And
a video showing a Tesla hitting a child on a bicycle quickly spread around a Tesla office in Silicon Valley. What the hell, man?
And it's just a matter of time before somebody posts that on Twitter or somebody posts it on TikTok or Instagram to get
What
hits.
is wrong with people?
People are awful.
I mean, to your point, it's not hard to predict that this kind of stuff would happen.
Right.
Yeah. And it's been happening forever. I mean, from the oldest days of somebody going through the filing cabinet and pulling out everybody's salary. I saw a case like that once. They went into a cabinet, they pulled a piece of paper and they put it on the copy machine and hit like 1,000 copies and just left it running. And then, people were walking by going, what is this? And they saw all the salaries of all these different people, and it caused total chaos. Yeah. And I mean, I'm a big believer in transparency of salary, but that was not the policy of that company. I worked there, and and here comes people saying, hey, why do you make more money than I do? And I was like, because I'm so sexy. What's wrong with you?
Well, actually, to Doug's point, I did work with a group that they had policies against porn or stuff that was legally reportable and all this. And they were entering a project. They were going to be collecting a vast amount of internet-based data from a bunch of databases and doing analysis on it. And they were very worried, because they were uncontrolled sources, that they'd wind up with stuff that was porn or otherwise not suitable for work, which would break the policies, as well as something they might have to be legally reporting. And so they were actually going up the management chain to make sure, because this was a sanctioned mission that they had, but they wanted to not get fired for violating the data use policies at work. I mean, that's pretty cool. And management came back and helped them write some documents to sign, and everybody was on board, and here were the limit lines and blah, blah, blah. But even before they started, they had, you can't do these certain things. And but everybody worked together to get the mission done.
Well, you need to have the talk.
That was not the exception.
You need to have the talk with your employees about this, because especially today, where you may get compromised and some ransomware gang is going to start releasing all these memes that you made. And, again, I mean, I'm opposed to that ethically and morally. Not everybody is, but for whatever reason, you shouldn't be doing this, and you need to make sure your people understand that, because I've just seen this over and over again, where we saw IT people reading people's emails and so forth. And, even if they said, oh, I'm just keeping it to myself, I just amuse myself when I'm bored at lunch and I sit down and read people's emails, and, they're not really supposed to be using this for personal business. I know, but they do it. And then, it's like, no, you can't do that. You have to treat this like with respect, and take your job seriously. Stop being a clown. But it's a never-ending battle. But this was really atrocious, and especially after Tesla denied it repeatedly. But it was pretty bad. And I mean, I'd say that probably about every company that has cameras in the car that's streaming up the cloud, because they're probably all doing it.
Well, I'm hoping that's what you have to assume. I'm hoping some of those employees win a free ride in a SpaceX test shot.
Yeah, Elon may put them in the giant Tesla slingshot, right, and shoot them into orbit or something.
Anyway,
it's 9.
I think we made the point. Thank you.
Yeah, let's wrap this on a lighter note. I've been looking at story number 17 under Sam stuff, NYPD RoboCops. So. My first impression here was, isn't this the one that took the bath that dumped itself in a fountain a couple of years ago? And yes, it is that same Nightscope K5 robot. Hopefully it's better than that now, but apparently NYPD is playing around with this idea. They've got they're renting this K5 robot at $9 an hour, so they're basically paying it like a person.
I don't think they pay
I guess that makes sense for like a licensing model for robots. And then they bought a couple of Boston Dynamics Spot dogs.
Oh God.
Which are so
terrifying.
I don't know if it's like they're not planning on having either of them doing patrols or anything like that. I mean, that's the eventual plan with the K5, but more using them in situations where it would be dangerous for humans is how they're.
No, I mean, and I think that's a great
them.
idea. I mean, people have been using robots for that kind of stuff for a long time, and I think the more patrol officers you have, the lower crime is. I mean, we've known that forever. I mean, people don't get mugged when there's a police officer standing on the corner. but they can't afford to put a police officer on every corner all the time 24/7 because they just don't have the budget for it. So if you can find other mechanisms that can do this and you can do it responsibly, then, I'm all for it. But I still think
I don't know how well these things are armored, but
well, they're going to get abused.
That's the first thing I'm thinking here is like those cameras, somebody's spray painting right over those.
Yep.
Somebody's going to pry one of these apart.
Not to mention clever stuff. We had a mail robot once at the lab, and they rigged it so that they would try to back the mail robot into places it couldn't get out of and stuff. So I'm sure that enterprising young humans will find many clever ways to abuse these robots, and we just have to be careful and not decide to put flamethrowers.
Will they remember?
Yeah, well.
Will they remember, though?
Uh-huh.
Will the robots remember how we treated them?
Oh, they will. Don't you worry. Hello, Jimmy. I remember that day back in 2025 when you spray painted my lenses. Now it's time to be disemboweled.
Yeah. Oh, don't worry, Doug. We're going to be running Chat GPT-6 in these.
The sociopathic version.
Yes.
Be sure and patch Chat GPT. It's turned sociopath. And it's attached to a Boston Robotics attack dog with a flamethrower and bees in its mouth and all that good stuff.
Living in the future.
Yay.
Sci-fi come to life. Yep.
All right.
Yeah, I think with that, it's a good time. I thought that was a little bit lighter than
It was.
It went dark, though. You can't help it.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much, guys, for sticking with me to the end here.
Thanks, Adrian.
And, yeah, that's all from us. Paul will be back next week. Good
with
night,
a
y'all.
tan.
With a tan. Oh, wait. Hey, do you want to take me out, Doug?
Oh, well, thanks, Adrian. Over and out.